You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 73 minutes, we're going to be talking about 73 yards, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I'm Ian.
I'm John.
I'm Mark.
And I'm Matt.
Still can't get used to Matt being after me. He's always jumping in ahead.
Yeah. But okay. 73 yards then. In a nutshell, we'll just go round in a circle. We'll do it alphabetically. Let's stay with the alphabet. I'll have to jump in after John and before Mark this time. So Mark, that's your cue. You'll come in the one after me, okay? And just in a nutshell, 2 sentences max. What did you think of that? Ian?
I thought it was at turns terrifying, hugely enjoyable, but kind of familiar.
Ooh. John?
Doctor Who is free jazz.
JR? Yeah, it was turn left meets Years and Years. Mark?
Or turn far right. I guess is kind of the.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my contribution, Matt.
I thought it was It Follows meets Years and Years.
Yeah. Meets turn left. Because it does. It takes its. So this is Russell T Davies, as Ian identifies, basically repeating or going back to the well of something that he did before and just coming back to it and giving it a new.
Can I interrupt? My thesis is going to be that this is Russell T Davies pinching something from the Stephen Moffat era and rewriting it.
He always does.
It's the girl who waited.
But it's the girl who waited done. The twist at the end of this is it's not the girl who waited. It's actually turn left, isn't it? Because, well, I mean, I guess we talk about it, shall we? Shall we start at the back end and come forward? So, okay, so I've literally come to this conversation immediately having finished the episode. So it's not had any time to settle in my head at all. So, all right, let's find out how long it is since you watched it, because we're talking at like 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. John, when did you watch it?
I watched it at midnight last night. I haven't had time to rewatch it yet.
But at least you've got a few hours to think about it in the meantime. Ian?
I watched it at about 10 last night. So
American time.
It goes live at 7 in the US, but I had better things to do than watch Doctor Who. So I waited until 10.
And you've slept since then?
I have.
Hey, so it's the morning for you. Matt?
So I had my overnight oats whilst I watched this, and just before I cleaned my teeth.
I don't want to know what you were doing while you were watching it.
This was about, so I got up at 6 because Dax sort of woke me up and the light woke me up. Then I hung about in bed until about 7:30. Then about 7:30 I decided I probably might as well get up because I work for myself, so time is money. So it's not like I'm having a lie-in.
When you say time is money, are you intending to do the entire 73 minutes?
No, I was giving you the context of when I watched it. So then I got up and I made myself some breakfast. And I
want to know how many hours since you
started. And then I watched it. So it would be about 8 in the morning I watched it. Between 8 and 8:45.
Mark?
So, yeah, I watched it at midnight. Spoke to John about it at about 1 in the morning. And then I have just rewatched it. Just to kind of put together like because I kind of had thoughts on it. I was a bit annoyed last night, woke up this morning, I said, oh no, actually if you tie this and this and this, it works quite well. So I kind of watched it to kind of prove my thesis to myself, I guess.
So okay, I'm going to stay with you. Your thesis then, was your thesis that explained the things that you were annoyed about correct? Or were you right to be annoyed in the first place?
I think it's got a lot of flaws, but I think actually in terms of just there's a lot of people on Twitter already kind of saying, oh well, of course all of this will make sense after the finale, and it's like, no, I think this is very much standalone.
Yeah,
it's a folk horror thing. It's about the land being both the past and the future, and basically that it's what would happen if Ruby was abandoned and then kind of going back to remind her not to stand on the thing and everything's fine.
So this is my question, because turn left, I think
Sorry, is anybody else seeing Matt just sort of vibrating on the bottom of the screen, or is it just my internet?
I think it's
show us your hands, Matt. Okay.
Okay. It's weird. He's really glitching on my screen. It's quite distracting.
It might be him being closer to the camera than normal. Just looming.
Right. Turn left. And I've said this many times on this podcast, so I'll do this really quickly. My problem with turn left is that I think Russell T Davies thinks he's writing a story about things that actually happen somehow in some parallel universe, except the twist he puts on it at the end means that none of it actually happens. So I every time I watch Turn Left, as brilliant as some of it is, I can never escape the idea that I don't think Russell T Davies knows what logic he's setting up in that episode. And so my question with this then, having literally just come away from it at the end, I think what he's done is he's undone it. So none of it happens. So all of this entire episode is what could have happened rather than what did happen. And I think Stephen Moffat does things in a slightly different way. And I think what Stephen Moffat does is he does something that happens and then he lays over the top of that something that happened instead. So the original thing that happened kind of still exists, but it's been sort of overwritten. Whereas Russell T Davies, I think, undoes it so that it didn't happen at all. So that it's all sort of kind of, the entire episode is speculation, but speculation told as a story. So so I'm going to start with you again, Mark. But yeah, John, and then I'll go around in the circle. Did this actually happen? Go on then, John. You've definitely got something to say. Did this happen or not?
It's Russell T Davies is much more interested in the emotional consequences of the characters. So if you go back to something like, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords.
Oh, I know he is, but I'm asking, at the end of this story, has he undone it?
Yeah, I think he has, because you get the Doctor come at the TARDIS at the start, and he mentions this guy, Roger Atquin. And then...
triggers something, yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end, where they have the reprise of that scene, and she stops him treading into that fairy thing.
Fairy circle.
He mentions it again, and then they stop it, and I think then it's undone completely.
Yes.
It's almost like a loop that's cut off.
I agreed, but I think it's the opening of the letters. It's the fact she doesn't open the letters actually that I think stops it, because obviously Mad Jack is unbound. That's the whole, she's opening up the letters because the Doctor's already kind of, I think from the minute she says, I miss you, that sort of first letter, that's I think the point where the Doctor kind of disappears, as it were. And then the next one, she kind of lets Mad Jack out of the box. So so I think it's not opening those letters that's the thing that kind of keeps everything on track. But it's also, all things are kind of possible now in sort of Russell T's kind of magical universe thing. So I think it kind of happened, but it didn't happen, and that's kind of okay because magic and barriers being eroded and things like that.
Well, how do we feel? Okay, Matt and Iain then, how do we feel about this? How do we feel about the idea that in the Doctor Who universe, as things stand right now, magic things can happen? Witchcraft and stuff can be possible, I guess.
Which one of us?
Well, you, Matt, you go, you're talking.
Well, I don't think it does. I don't think this is an example of that. I think it starts looking like an example of that. And then there's an interesting scene in the pub, which gets a little bit over the top, but that's played as a joke. And then it just grinds into something Russell T Davies has done before with an admittedly creepy bit. So for me, did this happen or not was the least interesting bit of it. I like the atmosphere in parts, but it just stopped being magic. It was much less interesting for me than the Devil's Cord, or the Giggle, or things that have come before. It's just convention. It's more conventional. I don't think Russell T Davies can bring himself to just surrender to magic or fantasy. I think his his kind of approach to religion and his approach to the supernatural and his approach to fantasy means he gets halfway through writing something and he just goes, oh, I better not go too far in that direction.
Maybe it's not that he tells himself. Maybe it's just that he doesn't believe it himself, and that's what stops him.
But that makes it less interesting to me. I mean, the most interesting bit for me is the lack of explanation, and we don't quite know what the person is saying. So there's a sort of a fuzziness about it, which I quite liked, but probably not enough of a fuzziness. I mean, it wasn't a sort of,
I thought the explanation for who that woman was, which is kind of obvious when you think about it, that it was always going to be who it was, but the explanation for that kind of undermined that, and whatever she's saying to all these people, they're running away, because that kind of didn't feel like it went with that explanation for who that person was, really. But I guess
was the person, so who was the person? Is it old
Ruby, isn't it?
Old Ruby. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd prefer if it wasn't. I'd prefer a fully like kick-ass magical episode where it's a genuine Welsh like spirit entity that's just kind of, tracking her away, that deletes this, changes whatever, not the trickster.
I think there's a version of it though where that could be what it is, because I mean, I guess the whole thing is that in this kind of alternate timeline that's created when they stand on the fairy circle, Ruby needs to be isolated enough to then make the decision to sort of join up with Roger at William. And, I think another pass at this by a script editor would have really hammered down into that kind of idea of people being isolated and kind of radicalized. And actually, so the political element of it and the fairy circle element of it would have come together, which I don't think they do. So, I mean, I think there's a version where the entity is actually just guiding Ruby along, and then Ruby becomes the entity at the end as a kind of final warning, and then that kind of loops everything back round.
Yeah, because none of it quite connects, does it? He's had about 6 or 7 different ideas, and he's put all the 6 or 7 different ideas on the page together, but he's not actually drawn the lines, drawn the dots between them. I thought, so cards on the table, we went round at the start, and we didn't actually, most of us, say whether we liked it or not. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it added up to an awful lot of sense, but I really enjoyed the experience of it. So I guess the proof is going to be in the second watching, whether I still get the experience. Now I know how it ends. But even though I was really enjoying it, I was kind of thinking by about the 2/3 mark, I either hope A, he doesn't explain all this, or B, that his explanation adds up. And sad to say, at the end, he did explain it all, and the explanation really didn't add up, because none of the dots were quite joined. So the least of it was actually these people are running away because this Ruby from the future is saying something that makes them run away. If it's a Ruby from the future, why would that be the case? But I think the most important thing about this episode is the political message. So the last 3 or 4 episodes, a lot of the time there's been like some really on the nose politics right on the surface of the episode. And actually, I thought the things that this one was dealing with, radicalization, right-wing politics, sort of, the politics of people like Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, and all that, because that's what we're really talking about. The expression's gone out of my head, but you know what I mean. Populism. It's about populism. That's really what it's about. But actually, I came away from the episode thinking, well, if you weren't going into the episode expecting it to be about something like that, I'm not entirely sure that's what you'd take away from it. I'm not entirely sure you'd think of it as being about radicalization or populism, because I don't think it quite added those dots up to make that story. And so I really wanted it to go a lot further in that direction, if I'm going to be honest. And everybody's nodding apart from that.
No. I don't think Russell T Davies is good at politics. I don't believe. I mean, he presents his politicians so extremely, and it's the same in Years and Years. So like pantomime,
London, right?
fairy tale
caricatures.
Yeah, and that just saps any kind of meaning out of it.
And I think, especially now that politicians are kind of caricatures.
Yeah, but not like that.
If we think about it,
I mean, I mean, Roger Ap Gwilym, from the sort of the pre-series publicity, you get the impression that this is going to be a major figure in a story and go big. And he's not. He just says something about nuclear weapons in one interview. And I don't think he looks all that sinister. He doesn't look sinister. We've been told he is, but we haven't shown anything.
I think that's the point.
But he doesn't come with any charisma either, so you get no impression in the episode of why people would vote for him in the first place.
Yeah, and I think the other main issue is that there's nothing about the wider context. So you've got Ruby kind of going through all these sort of bits from her life, but they're just dates with sort of different boyfriends, really. There's nothing like there's a mention of the sort of, was it the Russian War of 2030? And I said, well, what was Ruby up to when all that was going on? Like there's nothing to kind of, there's not that years and years.
She was growing her
where
hair.
You are showing what else was happening.
She was doing whatever it did to make her look very unlikely as a 40-year-old, just growing her hair and getting big glasses.
But also, you don't get any kind of context for why Roger Ap Gwilym wants the nuclear bombs in the first place, apart from, and you sort of get the impression, the Doctor says he brings the world to the brink of nuclear disaster. But you're actually watching it, and you're watching that bit where they talk about they're going to get from Pakistan, they're going to buy in the nuclear arsenal or whatever, and you're thinking, so even if he's bringing the world to the brink of nuclear disaster, if you're doing that, there's got to be a part of you that either wants to, or at least wants to risk the actual nuclear annihilation. Well, what is he then? Just an absolute nihilist or something? What is the motivation for any of this?
He's meant to be authoritarian, isn't he?
But you don't even get that. You don't get anything, do you?
It's like Roald Dahl writing James Bond. It's just. I don't think Russell T Davies is very good at writing politics.
No, he doesn't.
He's good at writing people, and that's
any
why
of the mechanics.
That's why I'd absolutely love to see them drop the politics in this and just stick to the magic and push. Yeah. That would push Russell T Davies's comfort zone. That would be more interesting. Just pure sort of horror. I love the woman in black bit at the end with the figure at the end of the bed, and all the trying to photograph the figure and it's blurry. All of that stuff would make a fantastic. That actually meant I stuck with it. I actually really enjoyed it, but it just became grindingly. The more years and years it got, the more jumps we got in Ruby's life. I just realised that I was watching Russell T Davies again. And it just sort of, I was just waiting for the next creepy bit to happen.
It could have been. This is exactly the kind of episode you wish he'd got.
Ian hasn't said anything for about 15 minutes.
I was just about to ask Ian a question.
I'm sorry, Ian after me, and you didn't.
I was just going to make this one point. Then I was going to ask Ian, but I was going to say this is exactly the kind of episode where you wish Stephen Moffat had been co-writing it with him, because he might have made it add up a bit more, and he might have made that politics hit home a bit more, like he basically did last week, I think. Ian, then. So going back to a couple of things that Matt's just mentioned, and watching this, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be in a few days, I'll be watching this with a 9-year-old, but I'm also thinking my stepdaughter loves kind of jump scare, sort of J-horror type, sort of these kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at this episode thinking, is this the scariest episode of Doctor Who ever, Ian?
The other thing is,
that's still a JR.
Is there a way to turn him off? I think
there is
possibly
from the conversation.
Yeah, drop him. I think it possibly is. For context, I'd had several ales at the point where I started watching it, so I wasn't entirely, on my normal analytical level. And I was terrified, in the hospital room at the end. I was waiting for the sort of shaking old woman to turn around in a sort of Bob from Twin Peaks kind of way with like a terrifying leer, and I would have absolutely screamed like a Jessie.
And the rest of us are terrified of the notion that you might have a normal analytical level.
I've never found it, but I'm sure it's there. Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing as this season goes on is that what RTD did with Saltgate is that he's kind of maybe taken your wisdom on board that he's not really very good at the sci-fi. So he's kind of shifted Doctor Who out of being, necessarily that kind of show, so he can concentrate on doing what he does. And if he wants a really hard sci-fi episode, he'll farm that out to Stephen Moffat. So you're left with him in this universe where he can do Buffy, where he can do any kind of teen drama. And the only thing you're judging it on then is the, that holistic, does it all add up? Does it make sense? And does it hit the arguments that he's making? Now, I hadn't thought about the radicalization or the political angle of it until You Fine Gentlemen explained it to me. Again, that might just be because I was drunk. But there isn't an internal consistency to it, really. You want to know what the old lady could possibly have been saying that made everyone so disgusted about Ruby. And given that it was Ruby, you can imagine she knows quite a lot of dirt on her. But it was still terrifying. There was something, because obviously for all of us, I imagine we were immediately transported back to being younger and having the Watcher standing on the side of the motorway when you've got the old woman.
I'm too old for that to have been terrified, I'm afraid.
Oh, I was terrified. A man made of cotton wool. No!
Yeah, I was terrified because there was a man made of cotton wool in Doctor Who, but for entirely different reasons.
Okay. So yeah, I thought it was absolutely the best scary TV that I've seen RTD doing.
Is that enough?
I think it is in this series. For 45 minutes, I think it's enough.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Matt. I think it is enough.
I was getting so angry watching it and thinking, this is potentially okay to very good. And I got just so increasingly angry that we'd had to sit through Space Babies when he had this in his back pocket.
Right. I think because it is Russell T Davies, so we're not going to get Stephen Moffat levels of making things add up on a weekly basis. We have to accept that Russell T Davies is just not that kind of a writer. So we have to, I'm always saying this, you have to, accept what it is and judge it for what it is rather than for what you might have preferred it to be. And Space Babies just really didn't work for me, and Devil's Cord didn't work a lot better. And despite all the things in this that didn't quite add up or didn't quite work, I still think, like Matt says, it's enough for this just to be a really weird, spooky episode of Doctor Who with these politics there, right? I mean, I like there to be sort of like a political content, not always, but if you're going to go for it, I like you to do it. And despite the fact that I don't think he really made the politics in this work, the fact that it was there and the fact that it was, I think it is probably the scariest episode of Doctor Who there's ever been, or as near as damn it. The fact that you have both of those things together, I think lifted this. So on the second viewing, this will really be the proof of the pudding, but I really think it lifted this. So that this was, I think, easily the best episode since Davies has come back. I think possibly, for me at least.
Another thing about it was that I think the first time this season, it didn't look cheap. You're still working with quite a small cast, but because it's on location and because of the gimmick of, there's an evil at the end of the road there, you don't get that two people shouting at each other in a big empty room that we've had so many times.
And it did, actually, because of the way it kept moving forwards. If you read the names at the end, there's about 24 or so names in this.
They even filmed on a train.
Yeah.
And I can verify that's accurate. I've done that train many times.
Ooh.
And was a woman watching you from the fields as you went past?
Oh, frequently.
There you go. But I don't want to know what you were doing on the train.
The old John will whisper in your ear and you will run away in horror.
Okay, so
again?
So just at the risk of offending John, one thing that did annoy me this episode.
The Welsh accent.
No, how much they spent talking about how nice the Welsh coast is when it's almost identical to the Devon coast, the Cornish coast. I mean, it's not a magical place.
On that score, I did appreciate the pub scene as what would happen if Matt ever walked into a Welsh pub.
I didn't. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Devon is very similar to Wales in that sense.
Except most of us don't come and do the accents as well.
So some of this was filmed in Ireland, right? So at the end, there's one of those like made with whatever it is, like from the Irish government. Which started to make me think, was it ever the Welsh coast or was it the Irish coast?
Filmed in Ireland?
I don't know. I haven't watched what's it called? Unbound?
Unleashed.
Unleashed.
I watched Unleashed and I didn't see any Irish bits. I suffered through. I mean, Unleashed, by the way, had 3 mistakes in one clip of Web of Fear. It was very frustrating.
When you say mistakes, what do you mean?
Well, I can't remember. But one of the mistakes is, Web of Fear isn't a Unit story, isn't the first appearance of Unit.
Oh, right, the things that people were saying, yeah.
Sir Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart didn't work with John Pertwee because he wasn't a Sir at that point. He didn't even become a Sir in Battlefield, as far as I'm aware. So I've just got very annoyed at Welsh cut price Anton Deck for talking about Doctor Who. And
don't even open the kettle of official podcast worms. Let's just forgo that and talk about something else. Roger Ap Gwilliam, then. No, I want to get back to this episode, and okay. Because we had lots of things. So I think you're right, whoever it was who said it, that there's an expectation that this episode is actually part of an ongoing storyline. I don't think that is the case. I don't think the episode itself is, but obviously several things in it sort of were and sort of weren't, because the idea that everything becomes undone at the end means that whatever way those things might have added into the storyline, they probably now don't. But nevertheless, we did have Kate Lethbridge Stewart, we had Susan Twist, we had Anita Dobson, we had the guy who's going to be Ruby's boyfriend, who has something to do with the series 2 finale. I think one of the 3 boyfriends she has in that sequence of where you look forward and you see her with 3 guys. I think it's 3 guys you see her with, and I think the first or the middle of those 3 guys might be the one who comes back and has quite a big part in series 2, but only in the bits with Ruby in series 2, obviously, because she's not in most of series 2. That's because she's the damaged goods twin of what's she called, Varada Sethu. But the first one of those 4 things is Roger Ap Gwilliam. The way this is set up is that he's going to become something big in the future. I think the way this episode ends, you don't free Mad Jack from the circle, and so Roger Ap Gwilliam disappears from the timeline. Is that the sense you all got? Or do you think that's a character who, even if he doesn't come back, might be referred to in future episodes?
I'm not sure, because I like, if we're taking it as, because RTD was what's folk horror, it's marvelous, it's yeah. You could argue, I suppose, that Mad Jack is actually just a kind of spirit of destruction and devastation that just actually is embodied in Roger Ap Gwilliam. So
yeah,
as long as that remains in the envelope or in the circle or whatever, that will never come to pass, but he will still exist. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to be an arsehole prime minister, at some point.
Well, this is it. Because Ncuti Gatwa says at the start the line about he's going to be this terrible prime minister before they get to the circle. Mm-hmm. And so is he actually wrong? In our universe, is what he said now become undone? Because I suppose that's how timelines change, isn't it? So that timeline could have been one way at the start of that episode, and then by the time they get to the circle, that timeline is therefore changed.
In terms of the impact the character made, if he was going to come back, I'd expect him to see him back in the last 2 episodes of this series. Any more than that, then basically this character I don't think is worth bringing back at any other point, because he was just there as a cipher for mad Prime Minister, which Russell T Davies has used, countless
many times. Yeah. Anybody else got thoughts on Roger Ap Gwilliam? Not really.
Is it Gwilliam or Gwilliam?
William.
There is you kind of can have a multiple reading on it. I think there's a lot of these points of the episode which does invite multiple reading, which is that Ruby could kind of have pulled him back from the brink rather than, the Doctor says on the brink. What if that pushed him over? So,
I suppose you could say if Mad Jack is this spirit who's been freed and kind of embodies himself into Roger Ap Gwilliam, maybe that explains his fascination with nuclear missiles, and maybe that's why the nuclear missile thing then doesn't happen. I guess.
But I think we just needed to see a little bit more, didn't we? If he's if the character's going to be like an evil nuclear weapon obsessed lunatic, we needed to know that. We needed to know that he had a secret agenda to get elected so he could get the weapons to do whatever he clearly wanted to do.
Well, there needed to be there needed to be an indication that this Mad Jack spirit thing was actually a thing.
You needed to see him kind of normal and then see him a few scenes later possessed.
It needed that sound of drums moment where John Simmons sitting at a desk and gasses the civil service, basically, because that's when it really solidifies. I mean, John Simmons, the Master, didn't need that because it's the Master, but this really needed to murder someone, basically.
But then I think Russell T's kind of doing the whole thing of, like, although it is a caricature, but I think he is kind of going, this guy isn't a kind of megalomaniac Master character. He's a politician that we've kind of got at the moment. You've got that whole horrible thing about he's very clearly raped that secretary, and all that kind of thing. So I think he's just not a very nice guy, and that's probably going to be the end of it, because also it's 2044 or 2046 or whatever it is. I can't remember.
46, yeah.
Russell T Davies is not going to set a series of Doctor Who 20 years in the future. Come on, it's just not going to happen.
Presumably, but then you just can't quite predict sometimes, can you? Despite the fact that he repeats things, sometimes, because the year 5 billion became a thing, didn't it?
It did,
the 51st century became a thing.
But 2046 doesn't matter to a 2024 audience, and Russell T Davies is always that it matters to the audience.
I was just going to say, I thought when she bought the cola and it cost her £5, I thought the twist in that scene was going to be that she was in 2046 already, because why would it cost £5? What was he signalling with the £5?
You've not been in a pub recently, JR.
No.
Yeah, I just
we've exposed JR's lack of a social life.
He's surprised when it cost a £5. I can only think the payoff for that was that they were having a laugh with her and decided to overcharge.
How long has Ruby been with the Doctor? So this is a fuzzy thing as well, isn't it? Because wasn't there supposed to be a 6-month gap between Space Babies and Devil's Cord? But now she's saying, she barely knew him. 6 months is enough to
There's dialogue at the start, but she wasn't necessarily with the Doctor all that time. Did she go back?
Okay. There's a hint that the episodes have been shown out of sequence to what they were originally planned to be, because wasn't it said that Boom was originally going to be the first episode of the series, and then Space Babies,
I think, wasn't it?
No, I think it was supposed to be the first. I
don't think Boom.
I can't, because Space Babies is such a follow-on from Church on Ruby Road that I can't see it not being episode 1. I can see it being supposed to have been on a New Year's Day.
Yeah, no, I don't mean they've filmed them and then broadcast them out of sequence. What I mean is when they planned them, they were in one sequence, and then they redesigned and then wrote and filmed them.
Maybe they intended Space Babies to be a tentpole in the middle of the series that would bring viewers in flocking.
See, I think it would have worked better than that as a first, better as that than as a first episode, because I think Space Babies is the kind of thing that makes you scratch your head if it's the first thing you're shown. But if you're shown all these other things first, and you can see what the tone is and who the characters are, and then they say, by the way, next week we've got talking babies, everybody goes, this Doctor and this companion in a sort of look who's talking type thing set in outer space. That is the kind of thing that maybe does actually ironically work as a tentpole in the middle of the series, because it's the mad one that everybody can identify with. Nobody knows what a Slitheen is or whatever, but everybody knows what a talking baby is and everybody wants to see it, right?
Well, you didn't.
No, I did actually. Space Babies is the execution of the episode, which I don't think was any good. The idea I was fully on board with.
Speaking of the execution of episodes, I think this script-wise is actually pretty thin, as we've kind of discussed. I think the reason this works is because it's brilliantly directed.
Yeah.
Like, it's so atmospherically done, so beautifully shot, and there's just a real kind of appreciation of like pace and tension, and I think that actually really counts in its favor, because you scratch the surface on this, there's nothing to it.
I tell you what else is really good about this episode, apart from in the very first scene and the reprise of the very first scene, Millie Gibson, she's really good, except when she's with Ncuti Gatwa. I thought she was terrible when the two of them were together, and as soon as he's gone, suddenly she's brilliant. It's
well, this
weird.
was the first one she filmed, wasn't it? So I wonder if that's their first scene together. So obviously she's filmed this whole episode, then he comes in, they film this bit on a cliff top.
Right.
I suppose, there's so much energy to Gatwa's performance. It's quite big. If she doesn't kind of at least try and match somewhere or go near him, she gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's brilliant, and I think when she's not with him, she's brilliant. But yeah, maybe you fit on something there, John. When he's around, she tries to match him, and that's when her performance goes haywire. Because I do think there's something in her performance when he's around. Sometimes, not always. Boom is the exception. The two of them together in that are brilliant, but maybe that's because that's more of a bottle episode almost. Should we talk about some of the other things that are possibly going to have legs later on in this series then? Let's talk about Anita Dobson first, because I'm not sure she does. I think they've just thrown her in at this point to remind us that she's going to be something, but I don't think she's going to be something until series 2. But I don't know, anybody else got any thoughts about Anita?
Very good. I liked Susan Twist. I thought Susan Twist was great.
We'll talk about Susan Twist in a minute.
Rare bits of acting in this, but Anita Dobson, really irritates me when she shows up. I think it might be Brian May's Badger song that it reminds me of. Just all the time I see her, I just hear Badger, 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 Badger.
It might be. It's interesting that she pops up in an episode that ends with old Ruby sort of being like, "Oh, don't stand on the thing," because obviously I think we all think, well, it's just old Ruby moved next door to young Ruby. Like, that's who Mrs. Flood is. So I wonder if, I'm sure it's going to turn out to be that. Susan Twist's a wrong in, like, she's some kind of god of time or whatever. But I think Anita Dobson's literally just old Ruby. But I might be wrong.
I think Susan Twist, I don't think is a wrong un. I think she's a sort of.
Oh, not the actress. I don't think it's a character.
I don't think it's a single character. I think it feels genuinely like a kind of a doppelganger through time.
You're a Splinter who's been cast through time and space, like Rose at the end of Bad Wolf.
Yeah,
and like Clara, of course, in The Name of the Doctor. And we know that Russell T Davies is picking up things that Stephen Moffat and, to a lesser extent, Chris Chibnall have done and putting his own spin on the ideas. So maybe that is it. Maybe Susan Twist is a character who turns up as a normal person, effectively, in a later episode and gets splintered backwards through the Doctor's existence, and that's why she keeps turning up.
I think she'd be presented a bit more sinisterly or with a bit more of an edge, but at the moment she's being presented just in a completely neutral. In this episode, she was a completely normal lady who came a cropper. So
and actually starts thinking that Ruby's weird because Ruby's kind of doing all this weird shit. And of course, anybody would, wouldn't they? So I think her reaction's fairly normal. They did actually shine a light on it this week by having the two characters asking each other, "Have I met you before?" And that's the first. So that's the moment in Boomtown where suddenly they realise that Bad Wolf is following them around time and space, right? But the Doctor wasn't there for that, and that was undone. So Ruby presumably is not going to remember that either. So we'll probably
she'll be back next week.
Well, that's what I mean. We'll probably get the scene again either next week or the week after, won't we? Where that thing happens again.
It's going to stop being a twist very soon.
Is that
I think
twist?
We change her name for that one then.
Wow. But right, is the I have a feeling that the Anita Dobson thing is going into series 2 and the Susan Twist thing is wrapping this year, unless anybody's heard different or thinks differently about it.
I mean, the thing is, you can, the thing with Anita Dobson, which everyone remember from Church and Rebuild, was the end where she broke the fourth wall, that metafictional moment, and you could say that line she has, it's nothing to do with me. Again, is that a metafictional thing? Because she just goes off at that point.
There were a couple of moments in this episode, weren't there? Iain, go on, sorry.
I was just thinking, does Anita Dobson really have to turn out to be anybody? Because, and I don't mean this in an unkind way, but if you go back and watch an episode of EastEnders, you'd want someone capable of slightly more nuanced, sinister villainy if you were going to unveil them.
Have you ever watched Russell T Davies Doctor Who before? Iain?
No, I'm aspirational. And I just think maybe Mrs. Flood is just Mrs. Flood, and it's just a bit of a job for Anita Dobson to get her some pocket money.
Russell T Davies cares naught about her acting abilities. The fact that she was in EastEnders, a soap opera, for many years, and was in some very, very infamous but very, very highly watched episodes counts more than
and
anything
don't forget
else.
Christmas at the Holiday Inn as well.
Oh yes,
I will never forget Christmas in the Holiday Inn. In fact, that's my therapist now. Give me 2 minutes. I have to answer this.
The metatextual thing, then, there was a moment partway through this episode. I'm trying to remember now because, as I said, I've literally come right from watching the episode and haven't had time to sort of go through it in my memory. Wasn't there a bit halfway through this where all of a sudden it looked like we were getting fourth wall breaking? And then didn't something happen that... Oh, that's right. The bit when they're in the pub and there's the banging and then she opens the door and then it sounded. And so this is because I was listening to it on headphones. So maybe this didn't work in the same way if you were watching on a telly. Through headphones, it sounded like canned laughter. And all of a sudden you were in the middle of a sitcom. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a brave move. And then it turned out it was just the people behind her laughing. But I don't know if that wasn't... So, because we've got this metatextual thing going on, it struck me afterwards, so that wasn't what it sounded like. But I did wonder if that was a deliberate sort of hint, a deliberate foreshadowing as to where the story might be going. Somebody in our comments under one of our posts has asked, is this going to be sort of not the same as, but something similar to WandaVision somehow? I don't know. So this was an episode that had less of that stuff in it, despite the fact that if this was a timeline that was being undone or something that was being imagined, because I mean, I suppose there's a reading of this. It didn't happen at all. It was all in her head or something, I guess. I don't know. It felt like they could have leaned more into that, but they didn't do, but they had this one bit that maybe. So I'm still wondering quite where all that stuff is going, if it's deliberate at all. And I know Matt thinks it's just...
No, I didn't get... Well, because I didn't get that during that sequence, I just heard the laughter of the people behind.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm not sure I'm tying that in. I think Susan Twist is probably enough to tie into, and the snow. So there are certainly clues, but I don't think it's going to go full WandaVision like that, because that would just swamp the stories that are... I mean, we haven't got that many stories coming up, so it would just start swamping them, I think.
And also, I feel like it's not... I mean, arguably 73 yards isn't really Russell T Davies's wheelhouse either, which is why it doesn't quite fully work. But WandaVision, the whole thing is obviously it's an emotional response to trauma that she decides to live in all these TV shows she loved as a kid. I don't really understand in terms of what we've seen so far, what the narrative purpose would be for this to be. Oh, this is all kind of, it's Doctor Who, but done like we all know it's Doctor Who, and Doctor Who works in this kind of certain way, and it's all nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Unless she's built as some kind of perfect Doctor Who companion, and we're going back to that idea that they abandoned way back when.
Or we're in the land of fiction.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of people have said land of fiction, but shall I tell you what I think?
No. The other thing that annoyed me about sorry, was that a rhetorical question?
Well, I think it's Russell T Davies again picking up on something that Stephen Moffat did and spinning it his way. So, on the one hand, Russell T Davies has said he'd like to somehow do a version of Damaged Goods for the telly. And so that wouldn't be Damaged Goods as we know it, but what it would be is taking some of the ideas from Damaged Goods and repurposing them for the television series as it stands right now. Davies also said before Damaged Goods, or irrespective of Damaged Goods, that he wanted to tell a story about a baby that was left outside a church, and what did that mean for who that baby was. Well, of course, that's kind of what happens in Damaged Goods anyway, except it turns out that that is twins. Right, take that idea and put a pin in it. There's twins, one of whom has been abandoned outside a church in a science fiction way and is the Doctor Who companion, but has a twin. Now, that idea sits there. Go to Russell T Davies looking at what Stephen Moffat does and repurposing that for Russell T Davies style Doctor Who. Series 6, the entire first half of Series 6 has Amy's doppelganger, Amy's twin, doing Amy's things while Amy is in effectively a tomb or a coffin, but it's an avatar. So you've got these twins, but one is the avatar of the other. And so this is how Russell T Davies can do this, but make it real. The Amy who's in the coffin at the end of Series 6, even though physically she's not the one who's been in the stories, emotionally she is, because she's been experiencing and controlling the other one. I'm saying, I wonder if Russell T Davies is doing a storyline whereby the Ruby that we've been watching is not quite a real Ruby, but an avatar that's being controlled by, I guess, the Farida Sethu character, who turns out to be the other half of this sort of conjoined twin that's actually the same person, in the same way as the two Amy's were the same person. And so the reality that we've been seeing is the reality as experienced by the other twin who's controlling it, but not actually doing these things. And hence, there's allowed to be a little bit of fourth wall breaking, because we're experiencing it through somebody's imagination rather than the actual physical thing that they were doing.
There was a quicker way you could have said that.
Sorry?
Ruby Sunday, left outside the church. Monday, Tuesday, what's her name? Works for Monday the church. Flynn. There you go. Sorted.
Yeah. And actually, another parallel with Damaged Goods, obviously, you can't have sentient cocaine killing people, but you can still put lots of snow on the screen.
Oh, Iain's like the last dot that he's joining. Iain's done it.
Oh, JR is so excited because someone's agreed with him.
Some Shaggy in the back of the car as well. Coming up then.
Well, there was talk of it this week, wasn't there?
Well, Jonathan Groff, you know.
Hey,
it won't be Shaggy in the back of a car, though. It'll be a Regency ball.
Oh, in a carriage. Yeah, there you go.
Isn't there supposed to be like a 10-minute dance sequence in that one? Was that one of the things that? Yeah.
Dear God.
That could be a dear God no moment, or it could be really brilliant because
I presume there'll be dialogue and exposition going on. It's not just going to be 10 minutes of dancing.
My expectations are not high right now.
Not after Maestro. Maybe it could be just 10 minutes of dancing. Maybe they did the episode and it did a rose and they were like, oh my God, we've edited together. We got 32 minutes. Let's stick a 10-minute dancing at the end.
The good thing about Regency dancing is because it's so formal. If you've seen The Favourite and things like that, it's not Regency, but it's close. It's so formal. It's almost like a fight scene. And then it can turn into a fight scene. And so the best adaptations of Pride and Prejudice I've seen is where they've actually made the ballroom scenes into basically Jackie Chan style fights.
I don't think I've ever seen Jackie Chan, Jane Austen, but I'd love to.
Given it's Kate Herron, I'd imagine that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of thing you'd get in Loki.
I guess we'll see. Next week, on the other hand, Dot and Bubble. This looks like I don't know, but I think it looks like very much Russell T Davies leaning back into the politics again. Although this time maybe more the socio-politics rather than the capital P politics.
Social media more, isn't it? I think
it is, but that is socio-politics, isn't it? That you're basically talking about there.
Yeah, it's basically Russell T going, all these kids on TikTok dancing, and they're not tuned into the real world like me, Russell T Davies. That's where it's coming across. I hope it isn't that, and I hope the message is that we'll actually know you can also, come together and take down a regime through social media. But I'm not holding out much hope.
Yeah, we'll see.
Oh, are you trying to get it cancelled for next week, and we'll be in a general election campaign at this point?
Yeah.
Right, does anybody have more that they want to bring up about this? I feel there are things we've left unsaid.
One thing.
The
fairy ring, again, this is like the Welsh coast. The fairy ring is presented by the Doctor as this beautifully constructed thing. It is just litter on the. It is
basically what they say in the pub.
It's rubbish. It's a load of rubbish, and the Doctor goes, "Oh, look at this beautiful trash that somebody's left behind. Isn't it beautiful? It's been constructed with such care." No, it hasn't. It's just string, and somebody's dumped some notepaper into it. Really
this lack of sense of wonder is why the Doctor would never pick you up, Matt.
I mean, this is why I would never go with the Doctor, because his enthusiasm would just irritate me. He'd land in Dartford and get out and say, "Oh, look at this wonderful real place. It's such a real place. It's great." Oh, no, it isn't. Dartford's a shithole.
Do you want to maybe give the episode a score then, Matt?
Stoke-on-Trent. I'm going to give it a 7, because even though it did irritate me, and even though the years and years bit I disliked, it had the woman in black bit, it follows, and those bits, it was shot in a really sinister way, and I did think it was quite creepy. So that kept me occupied for an hour.
Mark,
I think it's an 8 for me, because I did get a little bit more from it on a rewatch, and I think it is beautifully directed. I think it's one of the best directed Doctor Who episodes we've had so far.
There's some really interesting close-up work where sometimes as well they were deliberately making Ruby Sunday look kind of out of time and space, and it felt like they were making deliberate choices in some of the photography to kind of signal these things in a way that I've not seen really quite done in Doctor Who before. I'm going to go for an 8 as well. Although for me, like I say, second time it might be 6, it might be 10, who knows? Hedging my bets on an 8. John.
And I think, talking about this with my wife and myself, and it's one of those that I think it's the first episode of the season where I've been thinking about it after the episode. Right. Where there's enough there that you're just going, hang on, and there's bits that keep hooking into your mind afterwards. And I do think it's Russell T Davies trying to pull Stephen Moffat's trick of start you off in one genre, then shifting you to another one completely.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting tribute that way. And I quite like Sian Phillips being in there for just a cameo. So, yeah. I think I'll go with an 8, definitely.
Oh, sure. Iain.
I was going to go with a 9, because I think in the context of this particular series, this was a brilliant episode and it far exceeded my expectations. But the more we've talked about it and the more I've realised that, you need more of the motivation of Roger Ap Gwilliam, and you need consistency. I think I'll knock it down to an 8 as well.
So we've bummed you out, basically. So
you've harshed my vibe.
Oh dear. Right. We will, though, be back the same time next week to talk about Dot and Bubble. Until that happens, I was JR.
I was Iain.
I was John.
I was Mark.
I was Matt.
And we will speak again soon.